This is Kaliningrad, Russia's heavily militarized outpost wedged between NATO members Poland and Lithuania, home to nuclear-capable missiles that could strike Berlin in just 6 minutes. But it's possible this strategic fortress won't be Russian for much longer, and what happens next could shatter the fragile peace in Europe. Isolated from mainland Russia by hundreds of miles, strangled by crippling sanctions, and surrounded by increasingly hostile neighbors, Kaliningrad stands at a precipice so dangerous it should terrify anyone watching this video. Once the crown jewel of Russia's Western defense strategy, this tiny slice of Russian territory now shows cracks that could not only collapse Putin's ambitions, but potentially trigger a catastrophic confrontation between nuclear powers. But what exactly makes this small territory of just 15,125 square kilometers so vital that it could determine the future of European security? And why are separatist movements within Kaliningrad gaining momentum just as NATO tightens its grip around Russia's Baltic foothold? If you assume you understand Russia's military strategy, prepare to be surprised, because what follows may fundamentally change your perspective on European security. The stakes couldn't be higher. What's happening in Kaliningrad isn't just about one isolated Russian territory. It's about the potential trigger for the most dangerous military confrontation between nuclear powers since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the most alarming part? The countdown may have already begun. Kaliningrad traces its roots back to the 13th century when it was founded by Königsberg by the Teutonic Knights. For centuries, it was a German city, serving as the capital of Prussia and the home of philosopher Immanuel Kant. This Germanic heritage would become critically important later, but we'll get to that stunning development shortly. And trust me, what happened next will leave you speechless. The region's fate changed dramatically during World War II. After extensive bombing by both British and Soviet forces, the Soviet Union emerged victorious and annexed the territory in 1945. The Soviets wasted no time transforming their new acquisition, expelling the remaining Germans and converting Kaliningrad into a closed military zone. Heavy industrialization followed with little resistance. After all, neighboring Lithuania was under Soviet rule as well, giving Moscow direct access to its new strategic outpost. But if you think the fall of the Soviet Union improved Kaliningrad's situation, think again. When Lithuania and Poland joined the European Union in 2004, Kaliningrad became completely cut off from mainland Russia. Suddenly, the Kremlin couldn't transport anything into the oblast by land without passing through EU territory first. First came isolation, then came military buildup. Now, we're watching a slow-motion disaster unfold. That geographic isolation has created a powder keg so volatile that one wrong move could ignite a conflict that engulfs all of Europe. What makes Kaliningrad so valuable to Russia that Putin would risk global conflict to keep it? 3 words: location, location, location. But this isn't just prime real estate. It's a loaded gun pointed at the heart of Europe. This isolated enclave is home to Russia's Baltic Fleet, consisting of 1 submarine and 43 warships. More importantly, it represents Russia's only ice-free port in Europe, a crucial distinction that allows year-round naval operations from the Baltic. Lose Kaliningrad and Russia loses its maritime stranglehold on the region. And make no mistake, Putin would rather start World War III than surrender this strategic crown jewel. But here's where it gets truly terrifying. Kaliningrad isn't just a naval base. It's a nuclear launch pad aimed directly at the heart of Europe. And the clock to doomsday might be ticking faster than anyone realizes. Since at least 2013, Russia has stationed short-range Iskander ballistic nuclear missiles in Kaliningrad. These 7.3-meter road-mobile missiles are capable of carrying nuclear payloads weighing between 480 and 700 kilograms. With a range of 500 kilometers, they put several NATO countries within striking distance. You'd be forgiven for thinking this is just typical Russian posturing, but you're dead wrong. The missile's launcher is built into an 8-wheel MZKT 7930 truck, making it mobile and unpredictable. Each truck can carry 2 Iskanders, which can be equipped with various warheads, including thermobaric vacuum bombs that create fireballs capable of sucking the oxygen out of the air and collapsing buildings with devastating blast waves. Imagine being caught in that hellscape, your lungs collapsing as the oxygen is ripped away, buildings crumbling around you. This isn't science fiction, it's Russia's arsenal in Kaliningrad. The situation grows even more concerning when you consider Russia's recent military activities. In May 2022, Russia conducted military exercises in Kaliningrad that focused specifically on simulating nuclear weapons launches. Over 100 troops participated in these electronic launches of Iskander missiles at targets including military command posts, airfields, and equipment depots. The message to NATO couldn't have been clearer. Cross us, and we're ready to push the button. No warnings, no hesitation, just pure, calculated nuclear aggression. At this point, you might be wondering, with such a formidable arsenal, how could Russia possibly be losing its grip on Kaliningrad? Despite Russia's nuclear arsenal, the strategic equation in the Baltic is shifting rapidly. The vulnerability in Putin's Baltic strategy is about to be exposed. The answer lies in a 65-kilometer stretch of land with an unassuming name, the Salki Gap. This seemingly innocent corridor might just be the most dangerous place on Earth right now. This small corridor along the Lithuanian and Polish borders separates Belarus, Russia's closest European ally, from Kaliningrad. Once designated an official Russian spa resort in the 19th century, it would likely be one of Putin's first targets if he began a war with NATO. Military analysts call it NATO's most dangerous choke point, and for good reason. The geography here is a nightmare for defenders. A flat, marshy landscape with few natural barriers, surrounded by forests, perfect for concealing troop movements. War games conducted by both Western and Russian military planners consistently identify the Salki Gap as the most likely flashpoint for any NATO-Russia conflict. What makes this corridor uniquely terrifying is that neither side can afford to lose it. For Russia, securing the gap would give them a direct land route into Kaliningrad from Belarus, providing a vital supply line if NATO were to cut off sea access to the Russian exclave. It would also allow Putin to deploy more missiles and troops into Kaliningrad with ease. With the Salki Gap under Russian control, Putin could effectively cut off the Baltic states from the rest of NATO, making Article 5 defense extremely difficult. But here's the twist that has military strategists losing sleep. The Salki Gap works both ways. If NATO seized control of this narrow corridor first, they could completely isolate Kaliningrad, cutting it off from any possible reinforcement or resupply. Russian war planners estimate they would need to deploy at least 3 motorized rifle divisions, approximately 35,000 troops, to successfully secure the corridor in the opening days of any conflict. The American military has been quietly building up defenses around the Salki Gap since 2017, deploying enhanced forward presence battle groups to both Poland and Lithuania. These multinational forces, though relatively small, serve as a tripwire. Any Russian attack would immediately draw multiple NATO nations into the conflict. Both sides know that whoever controls this unassuming stretch of land controls the fate of the Baltic region. That's why the area has seen a dramatic increase in reconnaissance flights, electronic warfare activity, and even suspected infiltration attempts. It's a 21st century version of the Cold War's Fulda Gap, only this time the nuclear weapons are already pre-positioned for immediate use. And that's not even the most alarming development that's emerged in recent months. In June 2022, Putin promised to send Iskander missiles to Belarus, potentially creating another launch point within striking distance of European capitals. Those deliveries have since been completed, but the bigger threat is yet to come. In December 2024, Russia announced plans to deploy the new Overstretched Intermediate-Range Ballistic Missile (IRBM) to Belarus as well. With a reported range of up to 5,500 kilometers, the Overstretched could put virtually every major city in Europe within striking distance once it becomes operational in the second half of 2025. This escalation came after Sweden and Finland ignored Russian warnings and applied for NATO membership, a move that Putin had explicitly identified as crossing a red line. When these Nordic nations officially joined NATO, they transformed the Baltic Sea into a NATO lake surrounding Kaliningrad, with hostile forces and dramatically undermining its strategic value. What was once Russia's spear pointed to Europe's heart has now become a vulnerable outpost that Putin must struggle to defend. If you're thinking the stakes couldn't possibly get any higher, brace yourself for what happens next. In January 2024, NATO's military committee chief Rob Brewer shattered years of cautious rhetoric when he stated bluntly, "We have to realize it's not a given that we are in peace, and that's why we are preparing for conflict with Russia." German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius echoed these sentiments, pointing specifically to threats directed at the Baltic states, all within Kaliningrad's missile range. The situation escalated further when French President Emmanuel Macron suggested in February 2024 that France and its European NATO allies couldn't rule out sending troops into Ukraine. Putin responded in his annual State of the Nation speech, claiming that NATO forces were preparing to strike our territory and warning that Western nations must realize that we also have weapons that can hit targets on their territory. All this really threatens a conflict with the use of nuclear weapons and the destruction of civilization. Don't they get that? Meanwhile, Poland announced plans to seek access to nuclear weapons and to expand its military to 500,000 troops, with Prime Minister Donald Tusk declaring mandatory military training for all men in preparation for a possible conflict with Russia. But amid all this saber-rattling and nuclear brinkmanship, something even more unexpected was happening within Kaliningrad itself. Something that Putin desperately hopes you won't discover. And this might just be the most shocking twist in the entire Kaliningrad saga. You'd expect citizens living under the shadow of nuclear missiles to rally behind their leader in times of crisis. But this isn't what's happening in Kaliningrad, not even close. The people of Kaliningrad, who refer to themselves as Baltic Russians, have begun to question their allegiance to Moscow. When Russia began its war in Ukraine, many Kaliningrad natives took to the streets of Poland, protesting in front of the Russian embassy and threatening to hold a referendum for independence should the Kremlin fail to demilitarize the exclave by 50%. Putin expected loyalty. Instead, he got rebellion. And when Putin ignored these demands, they followed through on their threat. In 2023, an online unbinding referendum covering 5 Russian regions saw 19.4% of Kaliningrad's population participate. After 95,567 votes were tallied, a remarkable 72.1% favored independence from Russia. Consider this statistic carefully. Nearly 3/4 of participants in Putin's prized nuclear fortress want nothing to do with Russia anymore. The Kremlin's challenges are mounting by the day. These Baltic Russians don't see themselves as part of the Russian Federation's future. Instead, many wish to transform the territory into a 4th Baltic state, operating independently of its Moscow masters and engaging more fully with the wider European community. The very fortress Putin built to threaten Europe is now dreaming of joining it, a profound reversal of Russian strategy that few could have predicted. What's driving this remarkable shift in identity? It's a perfect storm of economic hardship, cultural alienation, and proximity to prosperous European neighbors. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Cross into Lithuania or Poland and you'll find gleaming shopping centers, modern infrastructure, and living standards 2 to 3 times higher than in Kaliningrad. As one local activist put it, "We look west and see the future. We look east and see the past." The economic disparity has reached breaking point since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. While sanctions have hit all of Russia hard, Kaliningrad has suffered disproportionately due to its geographic isolation. Prices for basic goods have skyrocketed, in some cases by over 300%, while salaries remain stagnant. A recent survey found that 68% of residents reported having to significantly reduce their standard of living in the past year alone. Adding fuel to the separatist fire is the resurgence of interest in the region's pre-Russian history. Despite aggressive Kremlin efforts to erase all traces of the territory's German heritage, many residents have begun reclaiming their Prussian roots. Unauthorized walking tours of Königsberg have become underground sensations, with locals rediscovering architectural gems that survived Soviet demolition campaigns. Some residents have even begun restoring the distinctive German-style facades of pre-war buildings, defying local authorities who demand conformity with Russian aesthetic standards. The Baltic Republican Party has tapped into this cultural renaissance, proposing a vision of Kaliningrad as a multicultural European hub that honors both its German past and Russian present. Their manifesto envisions a Baltic Singapore, a neutral, demilitarized free trade zone that could serve as an economic bridge between Russia and the EU. This vision has proven surprisingly popular, particularly among younger, educated Kaliningraders who feel more connected to Europe than to distant Moscow. But this growing independence movement isn't the only threat to Putin's control of Kaliningrad. Economic pressures are mounting, creating a vice that's squeezing the isolated territory from all sides. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Lithuania began implementing EU sanctions that banned nearly half of all goods that would normally pass through its territory to and from Kaliningrad. Coal, metals, construction materials, and various modern technologies can no longer enter the exclave via rail. This came after Lithuania closed its airspace to flights from Russia to Kaliningrad, forcing commercial carriers to use longer, more expensive routes over the Baltic Sea. The Kremlin denounced these actions as a blockade and threatened ambiguous consequences, but Lithuania stood firm, noting that it was simply complying with EU sanctions. And what could Putin really do? Lithuania has been a NATO member for 2 decades. Any direct military action against it would invoke Article 5, bringing the full might of the alliance down on Russia. If that weren't enough, Poland recently began officially referring to Kaliningrad as Kruliwiec in its documents, the name the territory had when it fell under Polish rule in the 15th and 16th centuries. Polish Minister of Development and Technology Waldemar Buda explained, "We do not want Russification in Poland, and that is why we have decided to change the name in our native language of Kaliningrad and the Kaliningrad region." But perhaps the most ominous development for Kaliningrad's future has been the arrival of the Wagner Group near the Salki Gap. Intelligence reports indicate that over 100 Wagner mercenaries have been deployed close to the corridor near Grodno in Belarus. Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki has expressed concerns that these mercenaries might be posing as Belarusian border guards or migrants, attempting to infiltrate Polish territory to destabilize the region. Though the Wagner Group lost credibility after a failed mutiny and the death of their chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin, their presence so close to NATO territory remains an unpredictable element in an already volatile situation. Even without Prigozhin, using these unruly mercenaries gives Putin a buffer of plausible deniability. If violence erupts, he can still claim it wasn't ordered by the Kremlin. But here's what makes the current situation truly unprecedented. For the first time since World War II, Russia finds itself so overstretched militarily that it can't properly defend Kaliningrad. During the first phase of its invasion of Ukraine, Russia redeployed its most combat-capable units from Kaliningrad, including its Air Assault Division and Marine Brigade, to support offensive operations. All amphibious capabilities of the Baltic Fleet were dispatched to the Black Sea. Now, these units are fully engaged in countering the Ukrainian counteroffensive, leaving Fortress Kaliningrad largely undefended. So far, some 5,000 Kaliningrad residents have been mobilized to fight in Ukraine, with an estimated 450 already killed in action. The authorities rarely discuss these casualties, focusing instead on the exclave's contributions to the war effort: quadcopters, camouflage nets, and clothes. A significant portion of its 2024 budget has been allocated to help finance the war, money that could have been used to address the growing economic hardships facing its citizens. And this brings us to the most explosive revelation of all, one that challenges everything you thought you knew about Russia's nuclear strategy. For years, Lithuanian Defense Minister Arvydas Anušauskas has insisted that Russia has had nuclear weapons stored in Kaliningrad. While these claims haven't been independently verified, reports indicate that in recent years, Russia's nuclear weapon storage bunkers in the exclave have been upgraded. Satellite imagery analyzed by Western intelligence agencies has identified at least 4 suspected nuclear storage facilities in Kaliningrad, including the heavily guarded Kulikovo base and an underground complex near Pionersky. What's even more alarming is that Russia has deployed its Kalibr cruise missiles to Kaliningrad, weapons capable of carrying both conventional and nuclear warheads with a range of up to 2,500 kilometers. These sea-launched missiles can be fired from corvettes of Russia's Baltic Fleet, creating a mobile and unpredictable nuclear threat that could strike targets as far away as Paris, Rome, or London. The SS-26 Iskander and Oreshnik missiles might get all the attention, but military experts warn that the caliber system represents an equally dangerous threat that's much harder to track and intercept. The presence of these weapons has allowed Putin to make increasingly explicit threats as tensions rise. Former chairman of Russia's Federation Council, Sergei Mironov, recently warned that any attempt by the West to enter the Baltic region would be a real red line, or rather a red button, that Russia would be forced to press. Russian state television has gone even further, with hosts and military analysts regularly discussing how quickly Iskander missiles could reach European capitals, often with animated graphics showing the projected flight paths and impact zones. But here's where Putin's nuclear strategy may have backfired spectacularly. The more he threatens nuclear war, the more his neighbors prepare for it, and the less effective those threats become. Poland has accelerated its military modernization program, investing billions in F-35 fighters specifically designed to penetrate air defenses like those protecting Kaliningrad. Lithuania and Estonia have dramatically increased their defense spending and built hardened underground command centers designed to survive a nuclear exchange. After years of nuclear saber-rattling, Western leaders have begun to see through Putin's bluff. American and European officials now speculate that he may be pulling back from nuclear threats due to pressure from China and India, both of which warned him there was no justification for using nuclear weapons. If Putin's nuclear deterrent loses credibility, Kaliningrad loses its primary defense. And if that happens, the strategic calculus for NATO changes dramatically. Without the nuclear threat looming, NATO might view Kaliningrad not as a danger to be contained, but as a vulnerability to be exploited. Poland and Lithuania could further restrict access to the exclave, strangling its economy and increasing internal dissent. The Baltic Republican Party's calls for independence will gain momentum, potentially leading to civil unrest or even open rebellion. Moscow's most powerful card might soon become its greatest liability. 3 months ago, this scenario seemed far-fetched. 2 months ago, it became plausible. Now, military analysts across Europe are treating it as a genuine possibility. Should conflict erupt, Kaliningrad would face an impossible position, cut off from reinforcements, surrounded by NATO forces, and defending territory that many of its own citizens no longer wish to be part of Russia. Russia once boasted the second most powerful military in the world. Now, after Ukraine, it's struggling to defend its own territory. Kaliningrad might become the place where that painful reality becomes impossible to ignore. But what would a post-Russian Kaliningrad look like? There are several possible features, each with profound implications for European security. The most dramatic would be independence, the creation of a fourth Baltic Republic, possibly returning to its historic German name of Königsberg. This would represent a catastrophic loss of face for Putin and eliminate Russia's forward operating base in Europe. Alternatively, if war erupted between NATO and Russia, Kaliningrad could become the focal point of the conflict. Russia would likely try to use it to take control of the Baltic Sea, while NATO would fight to remove the Russian threat to Lithuania and Poland. The presence of nuclear weapons would make this scenario potentially apocalyptic. A third possibility involves a post-Putin Russia being forced to demilitarize Kaliningrad as part of a broader settlement with the West. This would transform the exclave from a military outpost to a normal civilian oblast, potentially with special economic ties to the EU. What's clear is that the status quo cannot hold. As Russia continues to be bogged down in Ukraine, its grip on Kaliningrad weakens. Economic pressures mount, internal dissent grows, and NATO tightens its encirclement. For centuries, Kaliningrad has been a prize passed between great powers. Today, it stands at another crossroads, and the direction it takes could determine the future of Russia, Europe, and global security. So, what do you think? Is Kaliningrad destined to become the next flashpoint in the confrontation between Russia and NATO? Could its people successfully break away from Moscow's control? Or will Putin's nuclear threats keep the West at bay long enough for Russia to shore up its vulnerable outpost? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this analysis eye-opening, be sure to check out our examination of Putin will lose war in Ukraine as Russian economy implodes, or how one Arctic island just crippled Russia forever, both linked in the description below.